Richard Todd was born in Dublin, Ireland, in 1919. His father was a medic in the British Army and, as his posting required, the early years of his life were spent in India. The family settled in Devon upon their return to England, and Richard was educated at Shrewsbury Public School, in Shropshire. The theatre was his first love, and he furthered his dramatic skills at the Italian Conti School, thereafter moving to Scotland where he helped to form the Dundee Repertory Theatre. When war was declared, Todd went to St Andrews University on the following day to volunteer. He was not a member of the university, but he not only convinced the selection unit that he was, but also added that he had been reading English there for 6 months, and that he had obtained a cert A in his school cadet corps, a key point to being accepted as an officer. Despite success in passing off this invented career, Todd was too disappointed by a lack of interest in him thereafter. Becoming increasingly desperate to get into the war before it ended, he sent numerous letters to the War Office to press his case, which, in June 1940, was finally noticed. Accepted by the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, Todd went to Sandhurst to receive his officer training. He had a very lucky escape here when he was in a corridor on the second floor of a building when it was hit by a bomb, and he was blown into the garden outside by the blast. He got to his feet in the darkness and did not feel particularly affected by it, but an examination by torchlight revealed that his whole body was covered in blood from numerous small wounds. A spell his hospital delayed his passing out from Sandhurst until early 1941. Celebrating in London, he narrowly avoided death again when he found his usual haunt, the Café de Paris, was too crowded to admit him, and so he went elsewhere. It was hit by a bomb that same night and 84 people were killed. His battalion, the 2ND/40H Battalion, the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, was posted to 12 Corps in defence of Kent, where a German invasion, if it came, would almost certainly land. Todd was given command of the infantry in the Dymchurch redoubt, a fort of the Napoleonic era mounting 2 6-inch guns. In the event of an invasion, this would certainly have been a primary target for the enemy, and those manning it were told that, with the main defensive line far to their rear, they would be left to fight to the end. If you like the video, don't forget to leave your like. Subscribe to get more content. Also click on the bell to know when we upload new video. General Montgomery commanded 12 Corps at this time, and his characteristic emphasis on training and preparedness led to the formation of the first battle schools. Richard Todd attended one of these, and the experience allowed him to run his own school when, in December 1941, he was sent to Iceland with the 1SD/40H King's Own Light Infantry to be trained in Arctic and mountain warfare. Returning to England in September 1942, Todd, now a full lieutenant and assistant adjutant, attended a 2-month signals officer course at Catterick. Unknown to him, it was required that each man on the course should have a basic knowledge of signalling and Morse code, of which Todd had neither, and the commandant was consequently furious, but he was allowed a week to catch up. The course required him to prepare a lecture on one of a series of topics, and he chose the atomic theory of electricity, which none of his other students had dared approach. His acting skills came to the fore through being able to memorize large passages of text and present it by heart on the following day, a performance that earned him a Catterick D, one of the top 2 marks in a course with 200 participants. His success, however, had alarming consequences, as he was subsequently made the signals instructor at the regimental depot, where his acting skills, true to form, forgot everything that they knew once the grand performance was over, but he was saved by an excellent supporting staff. A chance meeting with an old friend resulted in Todd being transferred to the 42nd Armoured Division as a liaison officer. His stay here was brief, however, as his desire to get into the war led to him volunteering for the Parachute Regiment. He completed his jump course in November 1943, on which his performance was described as jumps well, cheerful, fine example to his men, and was posted to the 7th Parachute Battalion as assistant adjutant. The atmosphere in the briefing hut in the concentration camp on Salisbury Plain was a mixture of tension and eagerness. That day, June 1, 1944, the 30 officers of 7th Light Infantry Parachute Battalion had assembled to hear their commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Geoffrey Pine Coffin, the master plan for D-Day, the task of 6th Airborne Division in general, and the role of 7th Bearer in particular. So we now knew when, where and how the invasion of Europe would take place. Just before the briefing he had told me that I would be in the party as assistant adjutant, but that I was to be prepared to take over the mortar platoon or the signals platoon, so I should attend the meeting with this in mind. 6th Airborne was to capture and hold a vital bridgehead that would secure the east flank of the entire invasion. From Oostrum to Caen ran two parallel waterways, the River Orne and the Caen Canal, forming a natural obstacle against any attack from the east. The only crossing places were two bridges, one near Bonneville over the canal and one over the Orne near Anvil. As the Orne and Canal bridges were strongly defended and certainly prepared for demolition, surprise was essential. Therefore a coup de main force would swoop in silently in 6 gliders, 3 to each bridge, just after midnight and 30 minutes before the main parachute troops landed nearby. We of 7 Para were to relieve the glider party on the bridges and establish a western bridgehead, which would protect 6th Airborne's west flank and prevent counter-attacking German forces from moving out of the Caen area. At all costs, our western bridgehead in the Laporte and Bonneville area was to hold firm until relieved by forward elements of 3rd Division late on D-Day afternoon. Just after nightfall on Monday, June 5th, our truck drew up beside the Sterling, silhouetted in the moonlight. We scrambled out, clutching our parachutes, kit bags and arms, and formed up in a line in our stick order, with me at the head, as I was jumping first. Good, I thought. I'm going to be the first man on the ground, apart from Major Howard's glider troops and the Pathfinders. In the cramped fuselage, we sorted ourselves and our equipment and sat on the floor facing each other. I had with me 2 kit bags, one filled with mattocks and shovels which I was to jettison as soon as the jumping order was given, and the other containing a rubber inflatable dinghy that I would take down with me, suspended by a rope from my belt. Only eyes, teeth and bare metal glinted in the dim light. In the crescendo of noise, conversation was impossible. I fell asleep. It must have been about 0030 hours when I was awakened by the dispatcher, "Time to get ready, sir." I heaved myself to my feet and began to prepare for the jump. The sky seemed full of other paratroopers, their canopies silhouetted against the moonlight and the flashes of shells and anti-aircraft gunfire. At about 0040 hours on Tuesday, June 6, 1944, I thumped onto a cornfield in Normandy. To the east I could just make out the dark line of a wood, and concluded that I was a good half-mile from the battalion rendezvous. Meanwhile, the dropping zone was being raked by small arms fire, so I decided to get into that wood. I put my Sten gun together and loaded it. All seemed quiet as we reached the bridge and trotted over it. I got my first sight of a D-Day casualty. A legless German lay at the roadside, a groaning sound coming weirdly from him. Internal gas, I supposed. Normally, the sight of blood turns my stomach, yet I felt only mild curiosity. We doubled along the causeway towards the canal bridge, a large iron structure that could be opened to allow the passage of seagoing craft. Later it was to be named Pegasus Bridge. Suddenly, all hell erupted on the road ahead. Heavy explosions, flashes and tracer bullets rent the night like a spectacular firework display. Christ! I thought. This is it? Here we go. We speeded up our jog trot. Then, as quickly as it started, the tumult died down. An old tank probing the bridge had been hit by a Piat bomb and this was its ammunition exploding. Phase 1 of our task had been accomplished. The bridges had been captured intact and the western bridgehead established. Now we had to hang on until sometime later that day. Minutes before first light, a shattering cacophony erupted. with a glare that made full daylight seem pale as the softening up bombardment of the German coastal defenses began. For about half an hour the din, the vibration of air and ground, the magnitude of that assault, was far beyond anything I could have imagined. Hundreds of aircraft, American and British, rained thousands of bombs along that strip of gun positions, trenches and pillboxes that menaced the landing of our seaborne invasion force. Artillery and batteries of rocket launchers firing from special craft at sea poured a continuous hail of shells across the water, while naval guns, including the big ones of HMS Warspite, helped pulverize the defenses. From our grandstand position at La Porte, I felt sorry for the poor sods cowering in those German bunkers. How could they possibly emerge and fight back? But they did, and with impressive vigor, while the mighty invasion from the sea was being fought out, quite a lot, on a smaller but no less deadly scale, was going on in the 7th Para area. There was no cessation in the Germans probing with patrols and counterattacks, some led by tanks, and the regimental aid post was overrun in the early hours. The wounded being tended there were all killed where they lay. So too was Padre Parry, who had evidently fought like a tiger to defend them. Our position had developed into a classic airborne situation. There was no front line as such, and the battalion had evolved into 4 pockets of resistance. The 3 rifle companies and the battalion headquarters group, largely out of touch with each other, but each in positions of their own choosing. From our site on the slope we had a good view of the open ground between us and the canal bridge, and more than once we were able to drive off enemy infiltrating groups with enthusiastic bursts of small arms fire. I had primed my plastic gammon bomb and kept it handy just in case a tank might break through. There was sporadic enemy mortar and artillery fire we could do nothing about. One shell landed in a hedge near me, killing a couple of our men. I dearly wished we had recovered some of our own 3-inch mortars, especially now that a handful of mortar men had got through to us. From my slit trench on the slope at La Porte, I had a perfect view over the bridges and into the divisional area. In the distance, beyond the River Orne, the skyline was stippled with flashes and smoke from explosions or airburst shells. In the foreground, just below us, was the canal bridge, so brilliantly captured a few hours before by Major Howard and his glider force from the Ox and Bucks Light Infantry. By our end of the bridge, stood the cafe owned by the Gondry family, seemingly untouched. It was now being used as a first aid post. George Gondry and his wife had already dispensed champagne to all those who had had time for a swig, exclusively John Howard's men. The sparkling cash had been buried in his garden since the Germans had occupied the area in 1940, so it had matured nicely. I was contemplating this view when I noticed emerging from a screen of trees 2 boats apparently deserted and drifting slowly towards Caen. There was little or no current on the canal, so I mentioned my suspicions to the CO and he ordered his HQ group to fire on them. Our fusillade was briefly answered from below decks, but after a direct hit on one boat 2 parties of Germans emerged and were taken prisoner. So to add to our battle honours that day, we were able to claim a naval victory. At about midday, we finally heard the skirl of bagpipes that heralded the approach of the commandos under Lord Lovat. More than 1,000 men passed through us on their way to the main airborne bridgehead over the Orne. It was a fine sight, and there was great jubilation as red and green berets mingled on the road. There was still no sign of the seaborne infantry or armor reaching our area. We had expected them immediately behind the commandos. The D-Day program appeared to be running late. Already fastened to the canal bridge was a crudely painted sign, Pegasus Bridge, a name derived from the badge worn by British airborne forces, the winged horse of mythology. Since our landing 24 hours earlier, approximately half the battalion had been killed, wounded or were missing. But as we headed through the darkness, the pace was that of light infantrymen, brisk and buoyant, laden and weary though the men were. It had been a day to remember. During the 6th June, Lieutenant Colonel Pine Coffin and Lieutenant Todd were in the vicinity of La Porte when they happened upon members of No. 25 Platoon of the 2nd Oxford and Bucks Light Infantry, who at that moment had come under attack from a machine gun position. Private Dennis Edwards explains, "The stream of bullets ripped through the tree, inches above our heads, showering us with twigs and leaves. At that moment the 7th Para Battalion's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Pine Coffin, accompanied by a young officer, appeared next to our tree, crouching to keep below the line of the machine gun fire, and busily looked all around, taking in the picture. The two of them paused momentarily, glanced up at the splintered tree, and the colonel said to his companion, 'That is not too healthy, old boy. He's firing just a shade too close for comfort. We had better deal with him, eh?' With stones tucked under their arms, they wandered southwards in a leisurely manner and disappeared through a gap in a nearby hedge. A few moments later came the rat-a-tat-tat of 2 stones, followed by complete silence. Soon they reappeared with broad smiles upon their faces, looked towards us, and the colonel said, 'Well lads, that's fixed him up.' Years later I realized that the young officer who had accompanied the para-commander was Richard Todd. On the 11th June, Todd left the 7th Battalion to take up the GSO-3 operations, posting at divisional headquarters, with whom he remained throughout the remainder of the Normandy campaign and until the Rhine crossing in March 1945, when he was returned to the 7th Battalion. After the war, he accompanied the 6th Airborne Division to Palestine, where he had a serious road accident when his jeep overturned and he suffered 2 broken shoulders and concussion. Discharged from the army in 1946, Richard Todd resumed his acting career and rejoined the Dundee Repertory Theatre, soon making his West End debut with a part in John Patrick's play, The Hasty Heart. In 1949, Todd was called upon to repeat the same role, but this time in what was his film debut, his co-star being no less a man than the later President of the United States of America, Ronald Reagan, with whom Todd formed a lifelong friendship. In the years that followed, his film career advanced rapidly and earned him international fame. His most famous role came in 1954, when he played Wing Commander Guy Gibson VC in the cinema classic, The Dam Busters. At the end of the film he turns down an offer to celebrate the success of the operation by saying that he has some letters to write, that is, to the next of kin of those who had been killed. Todd later revealed that he found this a very hard line to deliver, as he had personal experience of writing such letters during the war. In 1962, he was given the part of Major John Howard in the film adaptation of Cornelius Ryan's book about the D-Day landings, The Longest Day. Due to the nature of cinema, it was impossible for the film to give a thorough reflection of the role of the 6th Airborne Division during the invasion, and as such their activities were solely represented by a reconstruction of the capture of Bénouville Bridge by Howard's Quatermain force. Although briefly mentioned, the role of the 7th Battalion in the defense of the western bridgehead was largely ignored, and so it appeared as if the defense of the bridge rested only on Howard's men. Naturally, the omission of their fierce defense of Bénouville caused some resentment amongst veterans, not least because one of their own was championing this reworking of history. Todd, however, regarded The Longest Day as a film rather than a documentary, and his part in it was simply that of an actor doing as he was told.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave your like. Please press the button to subscribe and support our channel. Also click on the bell to know when we upload new video. Which other topic would you like to find in our channel? Leave us your comments and suggestions.